The following is distributed by the Berean Call.
You're listening to Search the Scriptures Daily, a program in which we encourage everyone who desires to know God's truth to look to God's Word for all that is essential for salvation and living one's life in a way that is pleasing to Him. In this first segment of our program, we are in our second week of going through a new series featuring Dave Hunt's book, Seeking and Finding God. Now, it's hardly an imposing book of about 150 pages, but its content is life-transforming. Now, Dave, last week you gave our audience kind of an overview of what the book was about and why you wrote it. But would you just again tell our listeners, our viewers, why you wrote the book?
Well, Tom, I am given the privilege by the Lord to meet many people one-on-one, many of them in airplanes. And the Lord, amazingly, leads me to people who are generally, not always, when they're not interested, that makes the other ones all the more amazing. But generally, those who are searching, really searching and thinking. And so I have the opportunity to present the gospel to them, to reason with them, as we're told to do, to give them a reason. And those who show, when it comes time to part, a real interest. I mean, they've been showing the interest, but if that continues, and I ask them, I don't just send something to them. I don't say, give me your address, I'll send you something. No. I say, one of my books is called Seeking and Finding God. Would that be of interest to you? Very often they say, oh, yes. Well, I'll be happy to send it to you. Okay, here's my address. So I really wrote it because I didn't know of anything that was proper follow-up. Mm-hmm. We have that sort of thing, the reason why, for example, a tract written 100 years ago, I guess. We have a lot of things from the past, but I don't know of anything that really deals with the way people think today. Mm-hmm. So I wrote this. Hopefully it will lead people to Christ, but it would be a tool for those of you out there listening to us. I mean, I would recommend you read it. Every Christian ought to read it. Give you some ideas how to reason with people.
Yeah.
And I think it would be very helpful to give to others if the opportunity arises.
And at the very least, Dave, if those who enjoy listening to Search the Scriptures Daily, sometimes it can be helpful to have the book that we're going through. And we do that quite often. We take some of your books and go through them chapter by chapter. And so to have the book, they can just follow along. So Gary, later in the program, will explain how they can obtain a copy, if they wish, a copy of the book, Seeking and Finding God. Now, Dave, the first chapter is an interesting title, The Necessity of Certainty. Mm. Now, we went over that a little bit last week, but just that phrase, what do you mean, the necessity of certainty?
Well, Tom, we can't always have certainty. If you're going to make an investment, this looks like a good piece of property here, let's buy that one. Well, it may turn out to not be a good piece after all. You better read the CC&Rs, what are the conditions, covenants, restrictions, and so forth, or what is the zoning. Yeah, I mean, there are many things. You better be certain as you can be, before you jump in and do something.
Sure. Just everyday purchases, especially if they're a little spendy, a car, a refrigerator. You want to make sure you're checking out maybe Consumer Reports to see that you're getting something of value.
Mm-hmm. But there's one thing about which you better be certain. I mean, Tom, I know you like to play golf, never get the chance, but
well, it's 5 kids. I switched to fishing, Dave.
Right. The difference, I like golf. I played a bit of golf in the early days, but I preferred tennis. because if you hit a bad shot off into the rough or behind a tree or something in golf, that's going to cost you. But if you hit a bad shot in tennis, you run fast enough, you can recover maybe and get this thing going again. But you can't do that when you die. It's appointed a man once to die, and after this, the judgment.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you better be pretty clear about this. You can't take a chance.
What lies beyond? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you can't take a chance. Where are you going to end up when you die? And I don't think we mentioned it last week. Did we? Pascal's wager. Pascal, if you know who he was, a brilliant philosopher, but he was a Christian, and he said, look, he's arguing with an atheist. If I'm wrong in following God all my life, and you're right, when it ends, when I die, I'm dead. I haven't really lost anything. I was happy during my life anyway. I love to serve the Lord. And if you think that was an illusion, okay. But if you are wrong and you say, oh, when I'm dead, and you're not dead because the Bible is true, after death, the judgment, wow, you have lost everything. Mm-hmm. And so Pascal reasoned, well, I think that's a bad wager to make. I just wouldn't go for that kind of a deal. Better make sure.
Mm-hmm.
Look before you.
Right. So you give three opposing views. Again, talking about the necessity of certainty, the idea that I can really be certain what's going to take place after I die. But there are three opposing views. One you just mentioned, that, hey, when you die, that's it. You know, they just coffin closes, you're in the ground, and it's all over. Nothing, period. And then there's a view that says death and unconditional acceptance is the next step in the progression of our existence. It's a spiritual advancement. That's what some people think. And we're going to talk about that. But also, a third point is death is followed by physical rebirth that improves one's life through a continuous cycle of deaths and rebirths. So these are ideas that people have.
Right.
And we're going to look into the certainty. Can you be certain that's the way it is? But let's pick up with, again, we mentioned it, we went over it a bit last week, but let's pick up with death ends it all, period. Why isn't that the case, Dave?
Well, again, Tom, I can reason this very quickly with someone sitting next to me on an airplane. Materialism is dead. In other words, materialism, an atheist is a materialist.
Right. In other words, nothing exists but matter.
Right.
That's all.
Big Bang, energy, they don't know where the energy came from. They don't know what energy is. But nevertheless, that's all they have. So you're an atheist. You've got nothing else. So you are stuck with matter. Well, then your body is everything. That's all there is to you, just a body. So I'm thinking of Francis Crick, who co-discoverer of the language of the DNA. And he said, your hopes and dreams and ambitions and your marriage and your education and all, that's just an illusion of your genes. You're just a bag of molecules. And he called that book The Astonishing Hypothesis. You wonder, why does he call it astonishing? Because nobody really believes this. And Richard Dawkins, for example, a leading atheist, will say, well, this is counterintuitive, but still, these are the facts and so forth. So materialism, that is falling by the wayside. You cannot explain purpose and meaning and hopes and so forth, justice, How much does justice weigh? What does it taste like? What does it smell like? What's its texture? It has nothing. All of these things, in fact, the things that are most important to us. Let's take Erwin Schrödinger, Nobel Prize winner from Austria. He said, science can give you a picture of the physical world. It can tell you, like about a sunset, it can't tell you why it's beautiful. But when it comes to that which is most important, why am I here? Where am I going? What is truth? What is justice? Science has no answer to any of these questions. And he says these are the most important questions. So you're going to have to look outside of physical science. So my brain does not think. If my brain cells, this is what the atheist is, he's stuck with it. So he's got to see, well, how did the brain evolve? And then they'll take apes or whatever, and they will try to examine their brain. Or they'll take a schizophrenic and try to examine the brain. No, the brain, and I quote, I think in this book, a few, maybe a Nobel Prize winner, Sir John Eccles, who says the brain is like a computer that a ghost can operate. You are the ghost that operates your brain. Your brain doesn't think. It doesn't originate your thoughts. Otherwise, well, I wonder what my brain wants for lunch. I wonder if my brain wants me to go to this university or that university. No, you sit down and you rationally consider it. You make the decision, okay? So if your brain is not making the choices and decisions, who is? You are the thinker. And you make the choice. You decide. You activate the neurons in your brain, to follow what you want to do. When you die, your brain is dead. It's rotting. But you, the thinker, you are still alive, and you will face your Creator in judgment, give an account.
So, Dave, you have an interesting phrase here. I know you give some friends of ours credit for this, but you write, tissues know nothing about issues.
Yeah. Well, that's Martin Bobcan, and it's a well-put saying. Tissues, matter is just tissues. Do tissues know anything about issues? But issues are that's what life is involved in. Issues and choices and so forth. So there again, materialism is dead, and I would say most scientists, except for hardcore atheists, and by the way, I think most scientists are not hardcore atheists.
Mm-hmm.
For example, what book was I just reading? Well, by an atheist. But I think you would find God in there 100 times at least in this book. And then towards the end, he says, looking back and reflecting on this, I find this word God in there all the time. But he doesn't mean the God of the Bible. Or you could take Stephen Hawking, the genius in the wheelchair, in his book, A Brief History of Time. Stephen Hawking says, and this is an interesting phrase, he's not an atheist. He will tell you that. He's an agnostic at this point. I think he may become a Christian.
Mm-hmm. So an agnostic would say, well, I'm just not sure.
Right.
I'm not dead set against the idea of God. I'm just still confused about it.
But in that book, Stephen Hawking says, you would be hard-pressed to explain the universe as we have begun to understand it without a God who created it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe he is aiming for Einstein's God, because you have to be careful when you quote these people. I know I've read quotes about Einstein. He talks about God, and oh, wow, see, he's on our side. No, you better look a little further, because Einstein very clearly says, I do not believe in a God who interferes in our lives, who has plans for individuals and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
He would call himself a deist.
Right, which many of our the founders, those who came out of the Enlightenment, the founders of this country,
Right.
Jefferson, maybe Franklin Benjamin Franklin to a great degree.
They would talk of providence.
Mm-hmm.
And what they mean is God who created everything. We believe that all men are created equal. But then what happened? Well, this creator, he just kind of let things go. It's up to us.
Sure, God helps those who help themselves.
Right.
That's
So
Poor Richard's Almanac, by the way. I used to think that was a scripture verse before I was a believer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say you would be hard-pressed. Well, there are not many top scientists who don't believe in that kind of a God. And that's the kind of a God that Stephen Hawking believes in. But that's not the God of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And that God is not going to, that God is really doesn't make sense, because why would God, who has the power to create the universe, why wouldn't he, and individuals within it, well, they would say he used evolution. It's the most cruel, inefficient means. To get from here to there, you've got to have so many intermediary forms. To get an eye, for example, and it's not going to work this way, because an eye that doesn't work will not help your survival, so it'll just be thrown out. Natural selection would throw it out, but they insist with this. They insist on this. Natural selection would just leave so many bodies of imperfect eyes, imperfect noses, imperfect digestion. Oh, well, it's working up to it. That would be a cruel, inefficient way. Take millions and millions of years.
Mm-hmm.
Why would a God? So this is what I have against theistic evolution. By the way, Francis Collins, probably he would be looked up to as the greatest or most knowledgeable geneticist. He's in charge of the Human Genome Project that is mapping the whole human genome, 1 billion letters. He's a theistic evolutionist. He believes in God, but a theistic evolution. He's still hanging in there with evolution. Why would God, who could create everything, why would he go through this laborious, costly process? It doesn't make sense.
Dave, somehow something falls out here. You mentioned Crick earlier,
Right.
co-discoverer of the language of the DNA,
Right.
but an affirmed, confirmed atheist.
Right.
What happened there? Language, intelligence, how does he miss that? And now you're talking about Francis Collins, who is brilliant, yet what you just articulated is something very simple. Why would God put us through a process like this?
And furthermore, a process cannot come up with language. You make a good point.
Right.
Language has meaning. It can only be designed by an intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, Tom, materialism is dead. When you're dead, you're not just dead. Your body's dead, but you're not dead. And you will continue forever, here or, in heaven or in hell.
Right. Well, there are some other points, Dave, I think are worth going over that you mentioned. What about conscience? How does materialism explain conscience?
Well, I can tell you how Dawkins would explain it, or Hitchens, probably one of the best known, the two best known atheists out there. They're both brilliant. When, it was the beginning when we kind of swung down out of the trees and came out of
Primal soup.
Yeah, well, oh, no. This is much later yet, Tom. And we did develop a language, and somehow we lived in small clans, and we discovered, if you help one another, things work out better. And this is not morals. This is just built into our genes, because we learned that if you're kind and cooperative, that then, things work better. So that's all it is. And we can reason about this, and we can say, see, there's no God. You don't have to have a God, they would say. We can reason about this. That doesn't explain why. Let me give you a current example. Tom, it's interesting that Michael Vick, who sat around discussing?
Michael Vick, the NFL football player, who's now being prosecuted for...
Well, I think he's been prosecuted. He's probably in prison. I'm not sure, Tom, but I haven't kept up with the case. But anyway, who sat around? What society sat around discusses? Well, what do you think about dog fighting and training dogs to fight and the cruelty of this and so forth? No, it was just unanimous. You didn't have to have a discussion. The whole world condemned him. He had nothing to say in his defense. Well, there are other examples like that. Tom, it surprises me because the immorality in movies and in Hollywood. But we got the governor of New York. Whoops, going to prostitutes. Wait a minute.
And now we have his assistant.
The lieutenant governor, who now has taken over. Well, he's had multiple affairs, and his wife likewise. And, well, there's a sense of morality that is in all of us, and you cannot explain it in evolutionary terms because, again, tissues know nothing about issues. How do we explain it? The Bible says, Romans 2, verses 14 and 15, I believe, that's the proper verses, somewhere around there, that the Gentiles who have not the law, and yet they do the things that are commanded in the law, they recognize, and they accuse or excuse one another, they bear witness to God's law written in their conscience. Mm-hmm. So there's no other explanation for it, Tom. And that conscience, I believe, will torment the damned in the lake of fire forever and ever.
Well, let's end it with Lenin's dilemma. Why don't you explain that? We touched upon it last week.
Well, Lenin, of course, was a scientific materialist. That's what he called himself. Did not believe in God, an atheist. But then he wondered, well, where does this idea God come from? Now, Lenin believed as a materialist, you cannot even think of something that doesn't exist. Where would the thought come from?
Sure, because everything's a response.
Right, stimulus response mechanisms, what we are. Well, if you can't think of something that doesn't exist, where did this idea God come from? Well, those preachers, they instilled that insidious opiate of the masses. Where did the preachers get the idea? Well, that was a problem, and I think it's something that whoever's listening to us, or you might want to bring that up to somebody else. Think about it. You can't, I can think of anything. Really, come up with a new prime color for the rainbow. You cannot do it. But then where's the idea God? And it is common to all people everywhere. They may have perverted it, but they still have that concept.
For more information about the Berean Call and a free subscription to our monthly newsletter, call us at 800-937-6638 or visit our website at www.thebereancall.org.